Yeah,
Good.
recording.
So anyone have any questions? First, why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about some of the things that we may not have seen in the play that actually may be as fascinating as what we saw.
I'm not sure where to begin, and hopefully you will have some questions so I can just kind of focus on that. This whole thing started with a report in the newspaper in the Great Falls Tribune that the son of the Shelby mayor saw. It was in the wintertime, and this oil that was gushing all over it kind of dried up, and they were trying to figure out what to do to kind of perk up interest in the town again. And he read a notice in the paper that said, I think it was Montreal had offered Jack Dempsey $100,000 for his next title fight. And he thought, well, Montreal doing that is in the Great Falls paper. Imagine if we make an offer for $200,000. It'll be everywhere. We'll get all this publicity. People will start talking about Shelby again. And that, as far as he was concerned, was all he wanted was publicity. It's a stunt. Get it in the newspaper, get people talking about it, thinking about the oil that they can come find up here and the money they can make. And all of a sudden they'll start selling real estate again and everything will turn around and it'll be the Tulsa of the West. And it was a bad idea. Because everybody got excited about it right away. They thought this was a real thing, and it kind of took on a life of its own in a matter of days, weeks, months. And so this was in February. By March, everybody in the state thinks this is a real thing that's going to happen. They're chasing Kearns all over the country. They've got a plane that they're flying around to try to catch him in Salt Lake City and Chicago and New York, and they can't keep up with him. He keeps kind of giving them the runaround. I'll talk to you later, see if we can get you an answer and that kind of thing. And so everybody in Montana thinks this is going to happen. It's just a matter of nailing down Kearns, getting the deal set, and Shelby's going to have this fight. And so they eventually, with the problems that were going on in New York and things, and Kearns needed this leverage, he starts paying attention to the Shelby offer. And after a lot of this chasing around, it's May before it actually gets nailed down. He makes them agree to this $300,000 guarantee, which actually I don't think was all that much. He got that much for the Carpentier fight a couple years earlier. Obviously, Shelby didn't have anything like the infrastructure and everything that they had in Jersey City, so it was going to be a problem for Shelby. But it was a relatively reasonable amount of money given what he had gotten a couple years earlier. And so then the chaos started. It's May 5th. The fight's going to be on July 4th. They've got no hotels to speak of, no arena, no trees to build it with. That's my favorite thing. They built this arena in like 6 weeks, and I went out to Shelby when I was working on this, and it's like you're standing in a grass bowl. I mean, there aren't trees for I don't know how many miles. So how they did this in 1923 is kind of one of the most amazing parts of this. And so they're going to pay him in installments. The first installment when the contract is signed, the second in the middle of June, and that's when the trouble really started. They didn't have it. There's a story in the New Yorker years after the fight, kind of Doc Kearns retelling this whole thing. And the writer says, well, when the second installment came due, they had to admit to Kearns that they found themselves approximately 98% short. So there was like $1,600 they could give him on this $100,000 tab. And so people are rallying around the state. They've got their state pride at stake. They raise the second installment. But then all this chaos is in the news. Is the fight on? Is the fight off? You can imagine the effects that has on people's interests who have to come into the middle of nowhere from all over the country. Nobody comes. All these ticket orders that were in the newspaper in the weeks leading up were just that, pledges. Nobody was sending any money in. So they were basically broke. Kearns takes the gate, basically takes ownership of the fight at the end. People are breaking down the gates to get in and throwing stuff at Dempsey. Must be rough out there. And so that's essentially the, elevator speech or long elevator ride, I guess, for what happened. So if you all have any questions, I'd rather just kind of focus on the stuff that you'd like to talk about. So let me know.
I'm curious how you individually came upon this story and how it started for you.
There was an article, as far as I know, it wasn't an anniversary or anything. I think the writer just happened to be from Montana and decided to write about it in the Chicago Tribune probably 6 or 7 years ago. A friend showed it to me, thought it was an interesting story, said, you should do something about this. And I didn't, just read it, sat on it. But I thought it was a great story, but I didn't really know what I could do with it. And then I found out I live in South Bend, where Notre Dame is, nearish to Chicago. And I found out that Notre Dame has this huge boxing archive that I didn't realize was there. They've got all the history, all the files from Ring Magazine, and the most important thing, they have this publication called The Boxing Blade, which was edited by the guy who turned out to be kind of the unwitting middleman of this fight. The Shelby promoters, this shows you how much they knew about what they were getting into, sent a wire to a guy named Mike Collins in Minneapolis, who was in the boxing world in Minneapolis, thinking he was Tommy Gibbons' manager, and he wasn't. He was just a guy who was in Minneapolis who was editing this boxing. He managed some other boxers. And so he kind of laughed him off and said, you know, this is crazy. And then they coaxed him out there. He was managing another fight in Great Falls, and so he went to visit Shelby, and that's how he got himself involved. That's a long way of saying that then, as the editor of this Boxing Blade, after the fight, in the 3 or 4 issues following, he wrote this kind of serial about what really happened in Shelby. So it was kind of the one sort of objective, relatively objective, kind of firsthand, close to the time it happened, reporting on this event. And so once I knew all that was kind of in my backyard, this thing I was thinking about anyway, I just couldn't resist trying to do something with it.
I'm curious, the population of Shelby was 2,500 people then. It's about 800 more, 3,300 now. Do you have any sense in the research that you did, what would have happened to Shelby had this not happened, or would Shelby be any different today, or wouldn't it have mattered?
It's hard to imagine that it would be much different. It doesn't look like there's much more there now than there was then. This guy, Mike Collins, the editor of this publication, said he got off the train in Shelby, and he said it was early in the morning, still dark, and he said if it had been light, he probably would have never thought they could have a fight there, because he could have turned his head and seen everything in town and realized there was no way this could happen. So you know what I thought of a lot during this, the research for this, is it reminds me of what happens when you hear about cities now going after major sporting events like the Olympics or you know, any of these kind of major events that travel around. And in Chicago in the last few years, they've been trying to get the Olympics that they were shot down on last year. And at the University of Chicago, where there are all these economists, where I work, they try to blow holes in all the conventional wisdom, and they do a pretty good job of it. And one of the things that you hear with these big events is that, you know, the Olympics would be worth X billion dollars to Chicago. And so they go through and study how they come to that number. And it's usually various accounting tricks.